In this episode, we dive into the power of authenticity in B2B podcasting. We'll explore why genuine brand connections matter, how to effectively measure podcast success beyond just download numbers, and practical tips on using podcast content to drive engagement and support your marketing strategy. You'll also learn how to leverage podcasts to build stronger relationships and enhance your brand's impact. Where your head was at when you decided to even attempt bringing a podcast into the B2B space, because now it seems a little bit more commonplace, but you still see people that say, well, how do we measure it? Is it, is it worth the time, the hours invested? Why did you think to do this? Why did you think that authenticity was important in B2B marketing and podcasting was the way to capture that?
Well, authenticity has always been, the way forward. It's the companies that are more authentic with their brands are the ones that win the loyal audiences, right? It's always been that way. Tim Kopp, legendary CMO, who's now CEO of Terminus, said, I think he was the first one I've heard say it anyway. B2B, B2C, it's all H to H, it's all human to human, right? And so before podcasts and before video content was being used the way that it is now, still, even in written content and the way that we were doing our websites, the way that brands are embracing social media, those that were more authentic and less robotic win, right? Those are the ones that we like to consume the content from. And so specifically, how did podcasts come into play for me and into my strategies? I was a consumer of podcast content. I became the proud owner of a commute back in, I think, 2014, 2015, a longer commute than I had in a while, where I was driving, and I just kind of woke up to the idea of podcasts. Like, instead of just listening to the radio, I'm listening to some podcasts. And for me, I really enjoyed, and the business podcasts, ones about marketing and leadership, and got a lot out of those. And I found that I would have this 45-minute commute. I would park my car, I would walk into the office, and then I would take some notes down, and I would start to apply those things that I had just learned. I would be like, hey, I'm going to use this with my team today, or here's this cool idea that I'm going to talk to my head of demand gen about, see if we can work that into the strategy. And so being somebody who had really, really benefited from podcasts for a while, I was like, this is something that we should do. Our audience would really benefit from this. And like I said, we had been having conversations already. We were just recording them on our phones, or just taking notes with internal and external thought leaders. It was like, this is a no-brainer. Why don't we capture these conversations in a slightly more sophisticated way and share them directly with our audience, and then also see how else we can use them.
And a follow-up to that, because I actually think this is, as I researched Casted, I think this is actually the problem you're solving for. But what would you say to marketing leaders who are saying, well, how do we measure it? How do we show the impact on revenue, on our funnel, on our leads? So what's your point to that?
Been there.
Yeah.
So in doing that, once we got rolling with our podcast, and we were doing some video work too. And I was lucky enough that our CEO, so I rolled up to the CMO, but even our CEO would come and talk to me like, this is so great. I love that you're doing this. He was a big fan, and he would listen every week. So I had his buy-in as a fan, but then as the CEO, he was like, but what's it doing for the business? Like, anticipating that I was going to say, well, it drove this lead and we brought in this customer. And I was like, I don't know. Brand awareness. And hey, we achieved 10,000 downloads. And he's like, yeah, but what does that mean? I was like, I don't know. And so that was really frustrating to me. So as we set out to build Casted, that's something that's been really important from day one, and that we've been working on all along, saying, okay, really all of the tools and point solutions and little one-off things here and there that exist around podcasting today are made for podcasters, somebody who is creating a show to build an audience that they can quantify and monetize by selling ads. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not why a B2B and enterprise marketing team would do a show. They, Salesforce, I'm assuming they're a customer of ours, but I'm assuming that they're not doing a podcast to make more money. That's not a need that they have. They want to engage their audience and be seen as the thought leaders in the space, and to generate raving fans and build out nice funnels, right? So you can't measure that with number of downloads. The two don't line up. So really what you need to be looking at is engagement, just like you do with the rest of your content. How are people consuming your podcast and audio content and all related content that comes out of that? How are they consuming it? How are they engaging with it? Is your audience growing over time? Are people coming back? What are people doing after they listen? What parts of the conversations that you're sharing are they listening to? Are they going on and engaging with some of your additional content? Are they requesting a demo down the line? Probably not as a direct result of listening to that one episode, but like, are they starting to build a relationship? And so as we were building Casted, we said, how can we start to track that? How can we show the marketer what breadcrumbs are being dropped by people in their audience as they start to raise their hand? How can we bridge the gap between sales and marketing? It's something that you know a lot about. How can we not create content? How can we help marketers go beyond creating content for content's sake, or be viewed as creating content for content's sake, to saying, no, the content that we're creating is not only building our audience and generating engagement, but is also impacting revenue, influencing pipeline. Hey, salespeople, when you use this content, when you use this clip, it will help your conversation in this way. And so that's the information that we try to pass back in the platform. And then by integrating with CRM, we also like append the information that's already there that salespeople are adding to those customer contacts and the timelines and the information you have about your contacts by saying, hey, these people are also engaging with the content in this way. Might be a good opportunity to reach out, or might be a good opportunity to see how that's impacting those relationships over time.
And that's what Casted is doing. And I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that anything like this focused on B2B podcasting exists before Casted.
Yeah, at least not before we got started. That's why we created it. Is I looked, I tried to find it, and then said, okay, I guess we're gonna have to go build it. So
that's an entrepreneurial lesson in and of itself, right? Like, you're solving that need that you found in your own industry, in your own life. Yeah. Okay, so for businesses who say, okay, it makes sense to have a podcast if I have the bandwidth to do it, what businesses would you say should start down this path? Is there a certain revenue threshold that you should be probably, we're 10 million ARR or annual recurring revenue? Like, are we 15 million? Or is it something you just start right away as a founder, CEO?
Yeah, and I'm going to zoom out from that a little bit to answer your question. So the short answer is I think everybody should be doing it. Because if you are doing, quote unquote, doing content, right, which most companies are, there's this very, very small number of companies that might not really be focused on content for one reason or another, especially speaking of B2B, right? Okay. But if you are at all concerned about or prioritizing thought leadership and content marketing at all, having a podcast, having a show, having audio and video content is a really, really great place to start. And yes, there are some companies that can and do or could or should do really, really high-end, high production, high cost, large bandwidth content. And then there's others that are finding scrappier ways to do it. And what matters most is that you're putting your audience first, right? And that you're saying, how can we really serve them? And again, that starts with a conversation with somebody that they're going to want to hear from, that has insights and expertise and perspectives that are going to be interesting to the audience. So when you know your audience, go find people that are going to be great resources to them and great speakers to them, and talk to them, have a good conversation, and share it. And so what I would also say is that if you're thinking about, hey, should we do a podcast as its own standalone thing, you're kind of thinking about it the wrong way. And a lot of people are. And I think that's the way that a lot of people are seeing it today. The ones that are really succeeding, though, and what I really advocate for, is looking at it not as just doing a podcast over here on the side, but having conversations, putting those at the very center of your entire marketing strategy, and saying, okay, I'm going to go have some conversations. I'm going to create some audio and or video content around that. And then from there, I'm going to pull all the other stuff that I'm already doing. I'm going to pull blog posts out of that. I'm going to take some of those unique insights from people that I've talked to and turn those insights into a really engaging blog post and some really cool kind of interesting posts for social media. I'm going to get it to the hands of my sales team so that they can use the clips and insights and fun anecdotes and metrics that are shared on my show, so that they can have better conversations and move things along in their process faster. So when you look at it not as one more thing to do, but like pulling something into the center and making everything much more efficient, it really works for even, any team that's already doing content to kind of retool their approach.
And I'll ask you something else, because you probably come up with this, or you probably had to deal with this with working with different founders as well as larger organizations. Does it make more sense for the podcast to be positioned as something from an executive or a founder, or from the brand?
Gosh, I think really it depends, and I think then there's also other ones too.
I know it's not an easy answer, but I just, I see both sides, and I'm just not sure which one works better for a B2B context.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think something that's very clear that it's from the brand, right? Now you can leverage the personal brand of the host or the individuals, that the face and the voice of the show.
Yeah.
But when it's really clear that this is it's like your blog, right? I mean, does it make more sense to have a blog that's, Scott's blog, or that really represents the brand? I mean, if you want it to come back to the brand, you want people to identify with the company and the product or services that you provide. That just makes sense to make sure that it's closely related. And it's not always necessarily about an executive. Like sometimes, and we've seen this absolutely, that it's a marketing manager, or it's a engineer, or it's a salesperson. One of our companies, Lev, their podcast started when two account executives said, "Hey, we think this would be really helpful to help with our sales processes. Can we work with you? Can we work together on this?" And they worked out really well for them. So.
Yeah, no, I've seen both, and I didn't know that example, but I've seen some brands do it. But then I look at, for example, the opposite side, where you have all these brands, but then you have like a Neil Patel type podcast where it's he drives leads for his own business, but it's like mostly him. But I guess you're right. It does depend on a lot of circumstances. Okay, you're starting a B2B podcast. What would be your checklist of? You mentioned this a few times, like you want to interview people that are having relevant discussions that could be tailored towards your target audience, but just like some things to think about when you're launching a podcast from somebody who has done probably quite a few with them. And then a follow-up. I don't like doing too much at once, but I'll let you know where I want to go. So I want people to listen to this. I want them to understand how to start a podcast if they haven't started it yet. But then I also want people who have a podcast where it's not successful in a B2B space, or even otherwise, how they can grow a podcast after they've made sure that they have like those benchmarks, or those core components down.
For sure. I think it's really easy. And this is in any strategy. This is in any marketing campaign. This is in any content. It's easy to overlook some of the fundamentals, right? So I think whether you're starting out, or you're kind of zooming out from a show you already have, or looking to add another show, remember to check every once in a while, who are you doing it for? Who is your audience? Is it all marketers in the whole entire world? That seems like a pretty large audience, but okay, maybe. Or is it some subset? Is it, content marketers at high growth B2B SaaS companies? Like that's very different than all marketers in the entire planet. So make sure it's really front of mind, like who you're doing it for, because and then why you're doing it, right? So are you generating leads? Are you generating brand awareness? Are you trying to raise the profile of one of your executives in your company for one reason or another? Are you trying to raise funds? Knowing who it's for and why you're doing it, that paves the path for everything else. That gets into who are you going to have on the show. It's not hard typically to find people who want to be on your show, right? Anyone could start a podcast today and get 15 guests tomorrow. Now, would they be the right guests for your audience? Probably not. They'd be all over the place. You have an author, you'd have a, small business owner, you'd have, an investor in your company, you'd have all kinds of people. It gets a little bit harder, more challenging when you know really who it's for and why you're doing it, to really narrow in, okay, then therefore who we're going to have on the show. What are we going to talk about? Then you get into show format. So is the show format for designed to appeal to who it's for? Executives, just stereotypically speaking, and this is where you want to do some check-ins and see how things are going, but executives probably have less time to listen to a really long show, so you might want to keep it shorter and sweeter, whereas somebody who's a developer, perhaps I'm being very stereotypical, but like maybe the type of show that you're doing is for someone who's going to be listening while they're working and therefore wants to go deeper and listen longer, right? So there is no one-size-fits-all format. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. You really, really need to get in and understand who you're doing the show for, why you're doing it, and therefore tailor the rest of it around it.
No, that makes sense. Good advice. Now, if you're trying to grow a show, like you said, you want raving fans, but I'm assuming a lot of businesses, when they launch a show, they're just pushing it out against their existing customer, their customer base. How do you purposefully grow a show so that it can add more customers and not just give the existing customers more content?
Sure. So again, that all goes into why you're doing it, right? So that's assuming that you're trying to grow your audience. So that's where it's really important to start with the conversation and ring it out, that whole amplified marketing approach that I'm talking about. So if you and I are just to have this conversation, you're turned into a show and just put it on a shelf and that's it, some people would see it, some people would listen to it and tune in. But if you pull clips from that and you use that on social media, then you have and there truly are rich. It's not just like, hey, listen to our show, but like you're pulling out clips that are really engaging, and you're using audio, so you're appealing to like the visual senses of people as they're scrolling through social media. Then you're going to attract more from your social network and those people's social networks and those people's social networks to come in and listen to your content. And then when they're there, give them more to dig into, right? So give them ways to listen and consume it without having to sit through the whole thing. Give them clips to listen to, give them ways to share. Also, leverage your blog. And as you're publishing your blog, if you have clips embedded in the blog, then people are going to come from that. And as you're sharing your blog, then you're also inadvertently sharing your podcast. So you can see how this all connects and it all works together, where when you share one thing with one network or one audience, it kind of opens up an entire sphere of more. Also, as you bring people onto your show, if you're bringing people that really are going to be valuable, they can be internal, they can be external. When you talk about experts, like go talk to an expert, that doesn't have to be somebody who wrote a best-selling book. It could be an engineer on your team. It can be an intern, depending on who your audience is and why you're doing the show. Somebody who could be interesting to your audience could be anyone. And when you bring them in and you make it really, really easy for them to share the show and to share clips of the show and just make it super easy, then you're going to obviously tap into their network as well.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found this valuable, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you want to dive deeper into this conversation, check out the links in the description to watch the full episode. See you in the next one.